Welcome back to the channel, everyone. If you love captivating stories about men transforming into women in unique and fascinating ways, then be sure to subscribe and give this video a thumbs up. Now, let's jump right into today's tale.
Dr. Ethan Miller held the amber-colored liquid in the syringe up to the light, rotating it slowly between his fingers as he observed its viscosity. The fluorescent lights of his private lab cast long shadows across his equipment as the midnight hour approached. "Beautiful, aren't you?" he murmured to the syringe. "5 years of my life in this tiny vial, 17 failures to get to you, my little miracle worker." Compound R35 represented his crowning achievement, a synthetic protein complex originally designed to accelerate cellular regeneration for burn victims. The molecular structure had been his obsession, consuming countless nights and weekends until his colleagues had started referring to his office as Miller's Monastery. "Final documentation before human trials," he dictated, his voice clear despite the late hour as he recorded his observations into the secure laboratory system. At 36, Ethan had established himself as a maverick in pharmaceutical research. His lean build and perpetually disheveled dark hair gave him the appearance of someone too busy for mirrors, a scientist who prioritized discovery over appearance. The lab door opened, startling him slightly. "Jesus, Miller, you're still here? It's almost midnight." Dr. Sarah Chen, his colleague and occasional rival, stood in the doorway with her bag slung over her shoulder. Ethan quickly lowered the syringe below the counter edge, "Just finishing up some notes." "On what? That miracle burn treatment Global Farm is breathing down your neck about?" Sarah stepped into the lab, her eyes sharp with curiosity. "Word is they're getting impatient with your perfectionism." "Word travels fast," Ethan replied dryly. "And it's not perfectionism, it's science. The animal trials were remarkable, but you know as well as I do that cross-species extrapolation is notoriously unreliable." "Yes, I've heard your lecture," Sarah interrupted with a smirk. "But seriously, Ethan, you've been working yourself into the ground. If you keep this up, you'll end up needing medical intervention yourself." She gestured vaguely at his disheveled appearance. "Your concern is touching," he replied with a half-smile. "I'm just crossing some T's and dotting some I's." "Well, don't stay all night. Even lab rats get more sleep than you." She paused at the door. "By the way, you missed Jameson's retirement party. He asked where his favorite antisocial genius was." "Send my apologies, I'll make it up to him." "You know what they say about all work and no play, Miller." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "That it gets you published in the Journal of Biochemical Research." Sarah laughed. "You're hopeless. See you tomorrow, hopefully with less eye baggage." The door closed behind her with a soft click. Once alone, Ethan exhaled slowly and raised the syringe again. Global Farm had provided exceptional funding for the project, but their patience was indeed wearing thin. The preliminary animal trials had shown remarkable promise, severe tissue damage healing in days rather than months, with minimal scarring and complete functional recovery. But the regulatory approval process would take years unless he could provide compelling human data. He checked his watch, 11:48 p.m. The lab was empty except for him now, the rest of the research team gone for the weekend. The decision he'd been contemplating for weeks crystallized in that moment of solitude. "If it was good enough for Alexander Fleming and Jonas Salk, it's good enough for me," he muttered, rolling up his sleeve. "History is filled with researchers who tested their discoveries on themselves. Why should our 35 be any different?" He swabbed a patch of skin on his forearm with alcohol, the cool liquid evaporating quickly against his warm skin. 1 milligram per kilogram of body weight, he calculated aloud, measuring precisely. 78 kilograms means 78 milligrams, minimal systemic exposure to establish baseline metabolic response. The needle slid easily beneath his skin, a brief sting that he barely noticed after years of drawing his own blood for various tests. The amber liquid disappeared into his vein, and he pressed a cotton ball against the injection site. Time of administration, 11:52 p.m., he dictated into his recorder. Subject reports mild stinging at injection site, but no immediate adverse reactions. For several minutes, nothing happened beyond a slight warming sensation that spread gradually from the injection site. Ethan documented his vitals, noting a mild elevation in heart rate but nothing concerning. Plus 15 minutes post-injection, blood pressure 128/82, pulse 74, respiration normal. Slight vasodilation noted around injection site. Subject reports mild warming sensation spreading through peripheral circulation. He continued monitoring for another hour, documenting each subtle change he felt. The warming gradually intensified, creating a pleasant tingling that radiated outward from his core to his extremities. His mind felt unusually clear despite the late hour, thoughts forming with a crispness typically reserved for his first cup of morning coffee. Interesting stimulant effect, he noted, finally packing up his equipment. Similar to moderate caffeine intake, but without the jitteriness, could indicate increased cellular metabolism or altered neurotransmitter activity. By the time he arrived at his apartment, the tingling had intensified to an almost electric sensation throughout his body. He felt buoyant, as though his body had become somehow more efficient at carrying his weight. Note to self, he dictated into his phone as he collapsed onto his sofa. Investigate potential applications for chronic fatigue syndrome if these energy effects persist. Ethan moved to his personal research journal, documenting the experience in more detail than he'd include in the official notes. Mild stimulant effect with notable absence of typical sympathetic nervous system side effects. No tremor, no anxiety, no dry mouth. Possibly due to increased cellular metabolism rather than adrenal stimulation. He slept deeply that night, dreaming in vivid technicolor. Images of cellular structures morphing and dividing filled his unconscious mind. Mitochondria pulsing with energy, DNA unwinding and reconfiguring itself in beautiful, elaborate dances. His dream self observed with scientific fascination as tissues reformed, blood vessels rerouted, and cells communicated in complex chemical languages he somehow understood intuitively. When he awoke the following morning, the tingling sensation had not dissipated, but rather localized to specific areas: his face, chest, hips, and extremities. His skin felt hypersensitive, registering even the slight weight of his cotton sheets with unusual clarity. Morning update, he dictated, voice still rough with sleep. Enhanced tactile sensitivity persisting approximately 9 hours post-administration. Localized tingling in specific regions. The first noticeable physical change appeared as he prepared to shave. The stubble that normally shadowed his jaw by morning was mysteriously absent. His skin felt different beneath his fingers, smoother and slightly more elastic. "Well, that's unexpected," he murmured, leaning closer to the mirror. He ran his fingers over his jawline again, confirming the absence of stubble. Possible disruption of hair follicle development or temporary inhibition of androgen receptors in facial dermal tissue. Even his pores appeared refined, the overall texture of his skin noticeably improved. There was a softness to his features that hadn't been there the day before, a subtle rounding that softened the sharp angles of his face. Subject reports unexpected dermatological changes, he dictated more formally. Significant reduction in facial hair growth and altered skin texture, consistent with increased hyaluronic acid production and collagen remodeling. He took several photos from different angles, documenting the changes with the methodical precision that had made him a successful researcher. Science before panic, data before emotion, the mantra that had guided his career. By midday, more significant changes had become apparent. His hands, always efficient but unremarkable, had begun a subtle transformation, fingers appearing slightly longer and more tapered, joints less pronounced, veins less visible beneath increasingly smooth skin. "Looking positively elegant there, Miller," he said to his reflection, wiggling his fingers. "If this research thing doesn't work out, you could be a hand model." Even his nails looked different, stronger, with more defined half-moons at the base. The cuticles had retracted slightly, giving his nails a naturally manicured appearance. His phone rang, startling him from his observations. The caller ID showed Sarah Chen. "Hello," he answered, then paused at the sound of his own voice, slightly higher than normal, with a subtle melodic quality that hadn't been there before. "Ethan, are you coming in today? The Global Farm representatives are here for the quarterly review, and they're asking specifically for you." He cleared his throat. "I'm actually feeling under the weather, must have picked up something." "You sound different," Sarah said, suspicion evident in her voice. "What's going on?" "Just a slight throat irritation. Nothing serious, but I think it's best if I stay home. Wouldn't want to expose everyone to whatever this is." A pause. "This wouldn't have anything to do with what you were working on last night, would it?" "Don't be ridiculous," he replied, wincing at how unconvincing he sounded. "Just tell Henderson I'll send my progress report electronically and reschedule the in-person review." After hanging up, Ethan returned to his documentation. "The compound appears to be affecting collagen and elastin production," he noted clinically, taking more photographs. "Possible reconfiguration of dermal layer architecture combined with alterations in vocal cord elasticity." He spent the afternoon running basic blood tests using the portable equipment he kept at home, another eccentricity his colleagues had teased him about. Initial results showed significant shifts in his hormonal profile, with testosterone levels dropping and estrogen rising dramatically. "So much for minimal systemic exposure," he muttered, reviewing the numbers. "R35 appears to be triggering comprehensive endocrine recalibration through an unknown mechanism. Fascinating and terrifying in equal measure." The transformation accelerated that evening. As Ethan documented the day's observations, he noticed his voice catching oddly in his throat. Recording himself, he confirmed a subtle but unmistakable shift in resonance, his vocal patterns rising by several semitones into a more melodious register. "Listen to me," he said to his empty apartment, a slightly hysterical laugh escaping his altered vocal cords. "From baritone to mezzo-soprano in less than 24 hours. I could sell this to failed opera singers and make a fortune." Examining his throat in the mirror, he discovered his Adam's apple had reduced significantly, the contour of his neck becoming smoother and more graceful. His neck appeared longer somehow, creating an elegant line from jaw to collarbone. "This suggests hormonal influence," he murmured, the higher pitch of his altered voice still startling to his ears. "Unexpected endocrine response to the regenerative proteins. Question is, why is a compound designed for burn recovery triggering sex-specific physical modifications?" He paced his apartment, mind racing through possible mechanisms. The protein complex must be interacting with the SRY gene or its products, somehow modifying chromosome Y expression while amplifying X chromosome characteristics. Hunger finally drove him to order delivery, and when the doorbell rang, he hesitated before answering, suddenly self-conscious about his changing appearance. "Just leave it at the door, please," he called out, his melodic voice carrying easily through the apartment. "Need a signature, ma'am," came the reply. Ethan froze, processing the delivery person's choice of pronoun. "Ma'am, already?" he whispered to himself, glancing in the hallway mirror. The face that looked back at him was still recognizably his own, but with subtle differences that collectively created an ambiguous presentation: softer jawline, slightly fuller lips, more defined cheekbones. He opened the door just enough to grab the electronic signature pad. The delivery man's eyes widened slightly in confusion. "Sorry, I thought. Never mind, just sign here, sir. Ethan scrawled his signature and quickly took the bag. "Thank you," he said, closing the door before the interaction could become more awkward. "Well, that was validating in a terrifying sort of way," he muttered, carrying his food to the kitchen counter. "Nothing like a little gender confusion with your pad thai." The most dramatic changes began during the night. Ethan woke at 3:17 a.m. to an intense tingling across his chest. Switching on the lamp, he stared in scientific shock at the transformation underway. His pectoral muscles were softening visibly, tissue redistributing beneath his skin into what were undeniably the beginning stages of breast development. "Holy shit," he whispered, scientific detachment momentarily abandoned. The sensation wasn't painful, but intensely present, a constant pressure expanding outward as new neural connections established themselves with each passing minute. Fascination quickly overcame his initial shock. He reached for his journal, documenting the changes with trembling hands. Comprehensive mammary tissue development observed approximately 28 hours post-administration. Subject experiencing significant neural sensitivity consistent with de novo breast tissue formation. He continued recording observations, forcing himself back into clinical mode, despite the surreal nature of watching his chest transform before his eyes. Tissue expansion appears to follow natural biological development patterns rather than simple swelling or inflammation. Symmetrical growth with apparent ductal and glandular structure formation occurring in real time. He touched his changing chest gingerly, noting the extraordinary sensitivity. Neural remapping occurring simultaneously with tissue development. Sensory input registers as both novel and somehow familiar, an interesting paradox of perception. By dawn, the changes had progressed beyond what could be explained by simple tissue redistribution. His entire skeletal structure seemed to be adjusting, shoulders narrowing, while his hips simultaneously expanded outward, creating a framework his masculine physiology had never possessed. "This is biomechanically impossible," he muttered, watching as his waist drew inward significantly, establishing a dramatic curve between ribcage and pelvis. Bone density and structure should not be malleable in an adult human without significant calcium depletion and accompanying pain. He ran his hands along his transforming frame, documenting each change with scientific precision that barely masked his growing alarm. Subject reports no pain despite significant osteological restructuring. Hip width increased by approximately 2 inches, while shoulder width decreased proportionally. Most startling was the continued development of his chest, where what had begun as subtle swelling had progressed to unmistakably feminine breasts, perfectly proportioned to his transforming frame. The sensitivity had intensified as well, nerve endings multiplying, until even the brush of fabric registered with crystal clarity. "I've created the world's most effective gender reassignment treatment completely by accident," he said with a laugh that bordered on hysterical. "The Medical Ethics Board is going to have a field day with this one." He forced himself to continue documentation, knowing that the scientific value of what was happening transcended his personal discomfort. "The compound appears to be triggering comprehensive physiological restructuring," he recorded, voice now firmly in female register. "Possibly activating dormant genetic coding in the X chromosome while suppressing Y chromosome expression. Subject's body appears to be following established female developmental patterns at accelerated rate." A knock at his door startled him from his observations. Through the peephole, he saw Sarah standing in the hallway, arms crossed. "I know you're in there, Miller," she called out. "Your car's in the parking garage, and you haven't answered any of Henderson's emails. Open up or I'm calling building security to do a wellness check." "I'm fine, Sarah," he called back, wincing at his distinctly feminine voice. "Just dealing with some unexpected experimental outcomes." A pause. "Is that you, Ethan? You sound different." "It's complicated. I need a few more days." "Open the door, or I swear I'll use the emergency override code you gave me last year when you thought you might have been exposed to that neurotoxin." Ethan, who was beginning to feel the name no longer quite fit, sighed and wrapped a robe tightly around his changing body. He opened the door just enough to reveal his face. Sarah's eyes widened dramatically. "What the hell, Ethan?" "I may have made a slight miscalculation regarding compound R35's mechanism of action," he replied, attempting to maintain scientific composure despite the absurdity of the situation. "Slight miscalculation?" Sarah pushed the door further open, her scientific curiosity overriding social boundaries. Her gaze traveled from his transformed face down to where the robe failed to completely conceal his new feminine shape. "My God, Ethan, you didn't." "Self-experimentation has a long and distinguished history in scientific research," he defended weakly. "So does scientific disaster." Sarah stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "Let me see your notes, now." The next hour consisted of Sarah reviewing his documentation while Ethan, who had begun thinking of himself with increasing frequency as Eva, explained the progression of changes. The compound appears to have identified the XX genetic coding potential in my DNA and systematically expressed it while suppressing XY characteristics, he explained. It's actually quite elegant from a purely scientific perspective. Elegant? Sarah looked up from the notes. You've completely restructured your chromosomal expression. This goes beyond anything we've seen in genetic therapy. Do you have any idea what Global Farm would do with this technology if they knew? Create the world's most profitable transgender medical protocol, he suggested with a wry smile. Among other things, Sarah replied grimly, military applications alone would have defense contractors salivating. Imagine infiltration agents who could completely transform their physical identity at the genetic level. Well, when you put it that way, my accidental gender reassignment seems positively mundane, Eva quipped, adjusting her robe as she sat down. The question is where to go from here. Sarah studied her colleague's transformed features. You know, if you weren't in the middle of a scientific crisis, I'd point out that you make a remarkably attractive woman. Your cheekbones alone are positively unfair. I'll be sure to include your aesthetic assessment in my research notes, Eva replied dryly. Right after the section on how my entire reproductive system is currently playing musical chairs with my internal organs. Sarah winced. That vivid, huh? Is it painful? Surprisingly, no. Intensely strange, but not painful. It's like my body knows exactly what it's doing, even if my mind is several steps behind. After extracting a promise that Eva would continue detailed documentation and contact her immediately if any concerning symptoms developed, Sarah reluctantly left, taking a blood sample for discrete analysis at the lab. Alone again, Eva returned to her observations, documenting each change with scientific precision. Her face had transformed dramatically, jawlines softened into a delicate oval, cheekbones higher and more defined, brow ridge reduced to create a more open appearance around eyes that now appeared larger and more expressive. It's like watching evolution in fast forward, she murmured to her reflection. Every adaptation optimized for a completely different hormonal environment. Her lips had filled out, especially the upper lip which now curved in a pronounced Cupid's bow. Even her nose had refined itself, becoming slightly smaller and more delicate while maintaining character. I barely recognize myself, she whispered, tracing the new contours of her face. Yet somehow, it doesn't feel entirely foreign either, like seeing a familiar landscape from a completely different angle. Her hair, previously short and utilitarian, had begun growing at an accelerated rate, already reaching her jawline in soft waves of chestnut that appeared richer and more dimensional than her former color. The texture had transformed completely, thicker strands with natural body replacing the straight, unremarkable hair she'd had all her life. Well, at least I'm saving a fortune on salon visits, she remarked, running her fingers through the lengthening strands. 0 to shoulder length in 48 hours has to be some kind of record. The final phase of transformation centered on her reproductive anatomy. Eva experienced an extraordinary sensation of internal reorganization as her male physiology gradually reconfigured with remarkable biological precision. The internal restructuring appears to be following embryological development patterns in reverse. She dictated into her recorder, maintaining scientific objectivity through sheer force of will. External tissues internalizing along developmental fold lines, while internal structures differentiate to form female reproductive anatomy. What had been external folded inward through a process that defied conventional medical understanding, creating fully functional female anatomy with the same elegant precision that had characterized the entire transformation. It's as though the compound has accessed some biological blueprint that's been dormant since early embryonic development, she theorized, documenting the sensations with clinical detachment that barely masked her astonishment. The path not taken during initial sexual differentiation has somehow been reactivated and expressed with perfect fidelity. 48 hours after the injection, the transformation appeared complete. The person who looked back from the mirror shared only eyes and certain facial echoes with Dr. Ethan Miller. In his place stood a striking woman in her early 30s, with a physique that matched the perfectly proportioned feminine framework that had emerged during the transformation. Complete chromosomal reconfiguration, she concluded after running basic blood tests with her home laboratory equipment. The scientific part of her mind remained functional despite the profound disorientation of her circumstance. R35 didn't simply accelerate cellular regeneration, it fundamentally reprogrammed genetic expression at the most basic level. Her phone rang again. Sarah. "I've analyzed your blood sample," Sarah said without preamble. "You're XX chromosomal now, Ethan, or should I say, do you have a name you prefer?" "I've been thinking of Eva," she admitted. "It maintains some connection to my original identity while acknowledging the change." "Eva it is, then," Sarah replied. "Your hormonal levels are stabilizing into typical female ranges. From a medical standpoint, the transformation appears complete and stable. You're fully female down to the chromosomal level. It's unprecedented." "The implications are staggering," Eva said, pacing her apartment. "A compound designed to heal burns has instead demonstrated the capacity to completely reshape human physiology at the genetic level. The potential applications." "And ethical conundrums," Sarah interrupted. "Those too," Eva agreed, "beyond calculation." Eva spent the following days documenting every aspect of the transformation. Her scientific training provided a framework for processing the extraordinary experience, cataloging each physiological change with meticulous precision. "Day 3 post-transformation," she dictated into her journal. "Neuromuscular adaptation progressing rapidly. Initial awkwardness in movement patterns resolving as proprioceptive mapping recalibrates to new physical dimensions." Her body had achieved remarkable biological harmony in its new form. Hormonal levels had stabilized naturally, establishing a perfectly balanced endocrine system. Her movements, initially awkward as she adjusted to her altered center of gravity and different muscle leverage, became increasingly fluid as her brain remapped its understanding of her physical dimensions. "It's like learning to drive a completely different vehicle," she explained to Sarah during one of her colleagues' daily check-ins. "The same driver, but all the handling characteristics have changed. Turns require less force, acceleration feels different, and I keep bumping into doorways because my spatial awareness hasn't fully adjusted to my wider hips." "Most women take decades to learn how to navigate those challenges," Sarah observed with amusement. "You're getting the crash course." "Speaking of crashes," Eva replied, "I tried jogging yesterday and nearly took out an entire display at the corner market when these," she gestured to her chest, "decided they had their own ideas about momentum and physics." Even her thought patterns showed subtle variations, not fundamentally different from Ethan's analytical approach, but with nuanced differences in how information processed and emotional responses registered physically. Her core personality and memories remained intact while integrating with her transformed physiology. "It's fascinating from a neuroscience perspective," she noted in her journal. "The hardware has changed completely, but the software remains largely the same, with some interesting adaptations at the interface level. Emotional processing seems more physically integrated. Feelings register as whole-body experiences rather than abstract mental states." On the 7th day, Eva faced the inevitable question of how to proceed. The compound that had transformed her represented a scientific breakthrough beyond anything in pharmaceutical history, a means of complete genetic restructuring with seemingly permanent results. The commercial and military applications alone were both tremendous and terrifying. If Global Farm gets their hands on the complete formula, they'll weaponize it before the ink dries on the patent, Sarah warned during a strategy session in Eva's apartment. "Agreed," Eva nodded. "But R35 still represents a revolutionary treatment for burn victims and tissue regeneration. We can't just bury it completely." She reviewed her research data meticulously, searching for the specific mechanism that had triggered the transformation. The answer gradually emerged from the complex molecular interactions. A unique protein configuration in R35 had activated genetic expression pathways typically dormant after embryonic development, essentially allowing the body to rebuild itself according to its complete genetic potential. Not just regeneration, she realized, excitement building as the pieces fell into place. But synthesis, the creation of a new physical expression from existing genetic material. Like running a different program from the same code, Sarah suggested, following Eva's train of thought. Exactly. The compound didn't arbitrarily change me from male to female. It somehow identified and expressed what might be considered my body's alternative genetic pathway. The female form that existed potentially within my DNA, but had been suppressed by the dominant Y chromosome during initial development. With this understanding came a crucial discovery. The transformation appeared stable and complete. The compound had triggered a one-time reconfiguration rather than an ongoing process. Her body had established a new homeostasis that would maintain itself naturally without further intervention. "So you're saying you're stuck as a woman?" Sarah asked, the blunt question characteristic of their professional relationship. "Stuck" implies a negative connotation, Eva replied thoughtfully. "I would say I've been permanently reconfigured into an equally valid biological expression of my genetic potential." "Very politically correct of you," Sarah smirked. "It's not about political correctness," Eva countered. "It's about scientific precision. This form is as biologically authentic as my previous one, just expressed from different genetic coding within the same DNA." The question remained whether to report her findings to Global Farm. The company would undoubtedly recognize the commercial potential beyond burn treatment. A technology that could reshape human physiology at the genetic level represented billions in potential revenue across multiple markets. They'd market it as the ultimate cosmetic procedure, Sarah noted cynically. "Why settle for Botox when you can completely redesign yourself at the cellular level?" "Among other applications," Eva agreed. "The question is whether humanity is ready for technology with such profound implications for human identity." Eva spent hours drafting and discarding potential reports, each attempt failing to capture both the scientific significance and the profound ethical considerations. How could she convey the experience of feeling her body transform at the cellular level? How could data points adequately describe the sensation of experiencing the world through an entirely different physiological framework? After 3 days of deliberation, she made her decision. From her secure home system, she transmitted a carefully edited version of her research to Global Farm, one that emphasized R35's regenerative properties while obscuring its transformative potential. The compound would still revolutionize burn treatment, but its more profound capabilities would remain undocumented for now. Attachment, final report on R35 tissue regeneration protocol, she typed, finger hovering over the send button. Ethically questionable? Perhaps, but sometimes scientific progress needs to be paced to allow ethical frameworks to catch up. She clicked send, then immediately drafted her resignation, citing personal health reasons. The woman now known as Eva Miller would establish a new research direction, exploring the compound's properties independently before determining whether humanity was ready for technology with such profound implications for human identity and physicality. "You know Henderson is going to have a coronary when he gets your resignation," Sarah observed, helping Eva pack up her home laboratory for relocation. "First, the company's star researcher goes AWOL for a week, then submits a revolutionary burn treatment protocol, then quits without warning." "He'll survive," Eva replied, carefully labeling samples. "Especially when the burn treatment protocol makes Global Farm billions in the medical market. They'll name a wing of the research facility after me and forget all about my abrupt departure." "And what about you?" Sarah asked, pausing in her packing. "What's next for the brilliant Dr. Eva Miller, woman of mystery and mistress of molecular transformation?" "First, never call me mistress of molecular transformation again," Eva laughed. "Second, I've secured private funding from a discreet investor to continue my research independently. I'll be exploring the more nuanced applications of compound R35 away from corporate oversight. And the fact that this discreet investor happens to be your own hedge fund, cleverly managed through several shell companies, is purely coincidental." "Ethan always did have a talent for financial planning," Eva replied with a wink. "Turns out gender transformation doesn't affect one's investment strategy." 1 month after her transformation, Eva stood in her new laboratory, established with funds transferred from carefully liquidated investments. Her transformed body had become familiar, movements that had initially seemed foreign now registering as natural extensions of her consciousness. The woman in the mirror no longer startled her with her femininity, but simply reflected back the person she had become. "Synthesis," she murmured, examining a refined version of the compound under a microscope. Not just of chemistry, but of identity. The microscope revealed the elegant molecular structure she had created. Proteins folded in complex patterns that somehow contained the key to unlocking genetic expression in ways modern science had barely begun to comprehend. You know, if you told Ethan Miller a month ago that he'd be wearing a pencil skirt while conducting groundbreaking genetic research, he would have had you committed, she remarked to herself, smoothing the fabric over her hips. And yet, here we are, same mind, different packaging, and somehow it all works together. The scientist who had begun as Ethan continued her work with renewed purpose, exploring the boundaries between physiology and identity with the unique perspective of someone who had experienced both. The transformation had not erased who she had been, but added new dimensions to who she could become. A synthesis of experience that transcended conventional understanding of both science and self. As she carefully documented her latest observations on a refined version of R35, Eva reflected that the most profound discovery wasn't the compound itself, but what it revealed about human potential. The capacity to experience existence across different physical frameworks, while maintaining the continuous thread of consciousness that defined the self beyond its physical expression. "The body is simply the most intimate technology we possess," she wrote in her private journal, her handwriting more elegant than Ethan's had ever been, yet carrying the same intellectual precision. And like all technology, it can be reprogrammed to reveal new possibilities previously unimagined. She closed the journal, fingers that had once belonged to someone else, but now moved with natural grace, reflecting her thoughts and intentions perfectly. The synthesis was complete, not just of body, but of understanding that transcended the limitations of a single perspective. "Well, R35, she said to the vial containing her latest refinement, "let's see what other surprises you have in store for us. The journey from burn treatment to gender transformation is quite a leap. I can only imagine what other secrets you're hiding in that molecular structure of yours." Eva smiled at her reflection in the laboratory window, a woman of science whose understanding now spanned the biological divide that most humans experienced from only one side. In that unique perspective lay possibilities for discovery that neither Ethan nor Eva alone could have imagined.